chapter 1. We're at about verse 20 this morning. All right. And we want to try to, because we've had a little bit of a break, and we got to get our minds back in gear, where we're at and what's going on. And got to get focused back on what Paul is dealing with here in 1 Corinthians 1. And this section that we're looking at begins at verse 18 and continues really all the way through chapter 4. But we're looking at really at one chapter at a time. So this next section is from 18 through 31, at the end of the chapter. And we want to kind of go back over what is it Paul's having to deal with here at this point after the prayer. So let's have a word of prayer to begin with, and then we're going to dive right into what we've done, where we're at, where we've been, and where we're going with Paul and this very interesting and important book, 1 Corinthians. Gabriel, could you lead us in a word of prayer, please?
Please be with the members of this congregation who are needing your prayers or going through difficult times, Lord, due to health issues. We ask that you please be with them, that you comfort them as only you can, and help them regain their strength. Lord, we thank you for those many blessings in life, for our families, our homes, our jobs, all those things that make our lives a little easier. We know that all these good things come from you, Heavenly Father, and we thank you for that, and we ask that you continue to watch over us in this manner. Lord, we especially thank you for your Son, Jesus Christ, who, without his sacrifice, we would not have that hope of salvation. And we pray that we always live a life according to your will, that we may one day gain that heavenly home with you. Lord, we thank you once again. Pray always through your Son, Jesus Christ's name.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you. Okay. In chapter 1 here, verses 10 through 17, Paul identifies the first major problem and calls it out. What is it? Divisions. How are they divided according to these verses 10 through 17? How had the congregation divided itself up? Okay, and it seems that these people were following a person because they had done what to them? Baptized them. Okay, so you have Paul, who came to Corinth and had much success. We see that in Acts 18, verse 8. Many of the Corinthians hearing believed and were baptized. All right. And then Paul leaves Corinth, goes over to Ephesus, and Priscilla and Aquila follow him there. And then he heads back to Caesarea and Antioch. And in the meantime, Apollos, who was in Ephesus, sails over to Corinth and kind of takes Paul's place and teaches there. And so Apollos becomes a teacher and a preacher to these people in Corinth. And then, of course, he names them as those that might be following after him or after Apollos, after Peter perhaps, or of course even Jesus Christ. There were some that were following and claiming to be followers of Christ. But Paul asked a bunch of questions pointing out the fact that clearly and the most important thing that happened is the fact that Jesus was the Christ. He is the Lord. He is the one who was crucified. And so he's going to come back to that in verses 18 through 31, coming back to the fact, the message of the gospel is the crucified Christ. That is the core message of the gospel. It's not, it is, when we talk about the cross, that is basically the gospel message, the cross. Now, and that's what how Paul uses that language here in this first chapter. That is the most important thing that happened, is Jesus dying on the cross. And yet here you have these Corinthians that were, instead of following after the Lord, who again he identified over and over again in these first 9 verses. How many times did Paul refer to Jesus Christ in these first 9 verses? Did you notice that? We talked about that before. Nearly every single verse. Verse 1, verse 2, verse 3, verse 4, verse 5, verse 6, verse 7, verse 8, verse 9. How many times is that? 9 times in 9 verses. Look at verse 10. He names him yet again, the Lord Jesus Christ. He is it. That is the central person. And yet here you have Corinthians who are following after men, such as Paul or such as Apollos. Now, if I sound funny this morning, Marty thought I'd had a stroke the other day. I bit the side of my mouth really bad, and it really hurts. I'm having to not bite that again. So if I sound like I sound funny, that's why. Okay, just wanted you to know that. I know I sound funny, but I sound funnier today. All right, so Jesus Christ is the central character. And then he asked these questions, verse 13. Important questions. Is Christ divided? What's the answer to that? No, of course not. Was Paul crucified for you? No, that's silly. Were you baptized in the name of Paul? In the name of, all right? He's going to emphasize the name of Christ many, many times in 1 Corinthians. And he's done it early and often already in this first chapter. So, pointing out that he was thankful that he hadn't baptized many people, lest others say that they were baptized or he baptized in his own name, by his own authority, which of course he didn't. He's not using this to point out that baptism is not necessary, but that he's not, who baptizes you is not the critical thing. It's who you are baptized into. That is the thing. And he's reminding them, this is who you were baptized into. You were baptized into Christ. But why is that important? Okay, so as we talked about the Corinthians being, who were the Corinthians as a culture, as a group of people? What type of people were they?
Immoral,
Greeks, right. Greeks, they were steeped in human what? Wisdom, philosophy. They were attracted to debate, to intellectual discussions, and seeking knowledge and wisdom from men. And they followed after and had, for centuries, had these schools of philosophers, there in Athens and in the Greek world, that they followed after. And so this kind of carried over into the first century when Paul comes there, and the Greeks are still very much attracted to the philosophies of men and what they say. And that's what to them is wisdom. That is the most important thing. And so when the gospel comes through the preaching of Paul, many of the Corinthians tended to view the gospel as what? Just another philosophy. That's right. On a human, level. They could not see God acting and be involved in the gospel. And I'm not talking about necessarily these Corinthian Christians, but the general population would be ones that would have viewed The gospel is just another human wisdom or philosophy. The Greek word for wisdom is Sophia. It's a beautiful name for a girl, Sophia. We have somebody here named Sophia. Teddy and Sonia's daughter is Sophia. That's wisdom. And that's where we get our word philosophy from. Philos Sophia, all right? Love of wisdom. You see that? Philosophy. Like Philadelphia, love of brothers. Love of wisdom, philosophy. So there's philosophy. And these people loved it. And this is what Paul's having to deal with, is you still have these Christians who are having to weed out this mindset of philosophy as the principal thing. And so he's trying to make a distinction between human philosophy and God's wisdom. All right, and this is really, and you see in these verses that we've already looked at from really beginning at verse 17, all the way down through the end of the chapter. There's two words that are used a lot, and they're in contrast, kind of like in the book of Proverbs. Solomon, foolishness is one, and the opposite of that is what? Wisdom. All right, so foolishness versus wisdom. This was all about the book of Proverbs, foolishness and wisdom. So he's making that contrast. But it's very interesting. He's kind of a play on words here, because he talks about the foolishness of the cross. The message of the cross, verse 18, to the Greeks is what? It's foolishness to them. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't appeal to their thinking. It's just not. It doesn't make any sense, because they're not drawn to it. It's foolishness to those who are perishing. But here's where Paul is trying to bring the Corinthians back around where they ought to be. He's saying, look who you are. But he says to us, notice the pronoun there, to us who are what? Saved. Being saved, the gospel is the what? Power. It's the power of God. You see the contrast between men and men's wisdom and God and his wisdom. So when he talks about the foolishness of the cross, or the message of the cross is foolishness. Is it foolish? In real, truly, is it foolish? No, of course it's not. But he's using that language to accommodate the Greek thinking. To them, it is foolishness, even though it's not foolish. And now, all right, where we kind of left off last time, 2 weeks ago, is here at verse 20 and following. So he asks again more rhetorical questions. And he's trying to, again, show this gap or this contrast between the wisdom of men and the wisdom of God. So he asks these questions. All right, let's read down through verse 25, 20 through 25. Janet, can you read those verses for us, please?
Where is the wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the disputer of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of this world? For since in the wisdom of God the world through wisdom did not know God, it pleased God through the foolishness of the message preached to save those who believe. For Jews request a sign, and Greeks seek after wisdom. But we preach Christ crucified. To the Jews is a stumbling block, and to the Greeks foolishness. But to those who are called both Jews and Greeks, Christ the power of God and the wisdom of God. Because the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men.
Okay, thank you. All right, these three questions that he asked in verse 20. In a way, when you read those questions the way Paul asks them, what is he saying? Why would he ask questions like that? Alfred, you thought about that? Where's the wise? Where's the scribe? Where's the debater of this age?
Well, when you think about, I mean, the way he's asking it, right, but because if I'm sitting in the middle of a Bible class like right now, I would ask that question if we're all completely off of what you're talking about. So like, what happened to the wise? Y'all are here, where are the people? A lot of times we sit in a Bible class and we get no wisdom. And to me, that's what he's talking about, because they should know better
That's right.
than where they are.
Yeah. Anybody else? All right. He's in a way, he's kind of mocking the wise, the scribe, and the debater, or the disputer of this age. Those that, the philosophers, and those like the Greek or the Jewish, even the Jewish scribes who might be included in this. We know that the church at Corinth was not just Greeks. It had Jews there. Paul first came to the synagogue there in Corinth, and apparently one of the very first converts in Corinth was a Jew, Crispus, the ruler of the synagogue. Verse 8, Acts 18, was the first one in his house to become Christians. So there were Jews there that made up part of the church. Well, the Jewish people as well would have, and he talks about the Jews here. What do the Jews, as a group, are they always asking for as proof? Signs, all right. The Pharisees did this to Jesus. Show us a sign. Prove to us that you're the Messiah. And he's using that to generalize about that's the way the Jews think. Show us a sign. That's just their nature. We have to have proof. But of course, Jesus, he demonstrated himself as the Son of God over and over again in their presence, and they for the most part, of course, would not accept it. But be that as it may, these are scoffing ways of asking these questions. Are they, where are they? Where do they stand in the scheme of things?
I think the Jews had centuries of knowing what God expected.
Exactly. They had the law.
Whether they followed it or not, and the Greeks, they were like, not there.
Right.
They were barely learning to crawl.
Okay. Now think about this too. We have to also think about the Corinthians as a society steeped in the Greek culture. Philosophy, yeah, that was a big part of it. But what else is a very large part of Greek society, religiously? Idolatry. Now that hadn't come up yet in this letter. It's going to. Idolatry is going to have a very important role to play in Paul's teaching, especially from chapters 8 through chapter 10. So we have their attraction to philosophy, but also the fact that they had centuries of a mindset of worshiping gods and goddesses. Now, if you look at the Greek and Roman gods, and anything you've studied or read about the myth, the Roman gods, the Greek gods, and the mythology of them all. Generally speaking, this is generally speaking. There's obviously exceptions, but generally speaking, most of your idolatry and the worship of all these gods, and that was true even of the pagan gods in Canaan, Canaanitish gods, but especially the Greek gods. What do we think about the people, how they viewed the gods and goddesses that ruled the world? How did most people view these gods and goddesses? Were they benevolent, or were they cruel? They were cruel. They were fickle. They manipulated humans. People were at the beck and call of the gods, and so the mindset of the Greeks was, all the best we can do is appease our gods to make them happy, so that they don't punish us. We don't suffer any harm. We have to make these sacrifices so that we'll have a good crop. Otherwise, we're going to be cursed, or God's going to punish us, you know. Their view of gods and goddesses was not steeped in love, or an understanding that these gods loved them. You see how diametrically opposed their view of gods and a deity was compared to the God. The God is a God of love. And this is what Paul is trying to get down. He doesn't talk about love here in this first chapter. But he is talking about the very important and most essential need that every single member of mankind has. And that is what? Salvation, right? Verse 18. The message of the cross is the power of God to us who are being saved. That is what the message of the gospel was to save everybody. The gods and goddesses of the Greeks, that was not in their thinking, and that was not the thinking of the Greeks. That was not the God's role, was to save us. And so he's showing the vast difference between human philosophies and even in a offhanded way, the idolaters look at religion compared to what God in his wisdom is and what he's done. And the gospel is that message through which that mindset of God, deity, was communicated through Paul, an apostle, to these people. There is therefore the wisdom of men, which these Corinthians were attracted to as a general rule in the population, versus the wisdom of God that has now come into the world through the preaching of the gospel. And it's what these Corinthians had made the decision to follow, to obey. And he's trying to get them to come back to thinking, okay, who are you? What are you? It's not who baptized you. It's who you were baptized into. And that is why there should be no divisions among you. He's trying to, get this competitive spirit of following after human wisdom out of their thinking. Now, we can understand that this is something that would be rooted in almost in their DNA for generations, for hundreds of years. This is the way they would think. The gospel, we have to recognize that the gospel came on the scene in the first century it came out of nowhere as far as the Greeks were concerned. Now, the Jews should have expected it. They should have been expecting Christ. But even they failed to recognize Jesus as Messiah, and they crucified him, had him crucified. They rejected him. But as far as the world's concerned, Jesus coming on the scene was just, bam, he's now it. He is the answer to everybody's problem. And it was a shock. And it did, as some would say later, turn the world upside down. So Paul's trying to defend or point out the foolishness, really, of the wisdom of men here versus the foolishness of God in the minds of men is truly wiser than the wisdom of man. Okay, so he says, where are these people? They don't have an answer. They have failed. Has not God made foolish the wisdom of this world? What does the wisdom of this world provide? Not much. Maybe a little bit of guidance every day about maybe, at the very best, maybe, how to, be kinder to your neighbor. That's about the extent of it. Human philosophy doesn't really provide anything beneficial long-term, and certainly not spiritually, not eternally. It can't. It just can't, because it's human in nature and origin. So and that's why he says, has God not made foolish the wisdom of this world? That's what they were pursuing. So he begins there at verse 24, since in the wisdom of God. See how many times he talks about wisdom, contrasting the wisdom of this world versus the wisdom of God. Now he would choose to use the word wisdom of God accommodatively for the benefit of these Corinthians, because they're thinking wisdom, all right? So God, or Paul, accommodates them by calling the gospel the wisdom of God. It's wisdom. It's just not human wisdom. It's divine wisdom. There's a big, big difference. They didn't, but here's the thing. Notice what he says. For since in the wisdom of God, the world, through wisdom, whose wisdom? God's wisdom or man's wisdom? Man's wisdom. The world, through wisdom, man's wisdom, did not know God. Human philosophy cannot answer or account for or explain God. It just can't. And it didn't. And so it pleased God through the foolishness, there's that word again, in a accommodative way, the foolishness of the message preached, which would be the gospel, to do what? To save those who believe. Wow, I mean, that's the idea of being saved. The Greeks, they couldn't fathom that idea. You mean I need to be saved? Saved from what? They didn't think about themselves so much as spiritual beings, as even having a spirit that was going to last or endure. Yeah, they believed when they died they would go to Hades, and all that. But yet the idea of needing to be saved, and who is it that had believed? What would have been these Corinthians? Here it is. First, for Jews, they request a sign. Greeks, they seek. That is their drive. They seek after wisdom, the wisdom of men. But we preach Christ crucified. For the world, to the Jews, Christ crucified is a stumbling block. The word stumbling block here is the word we get our English word scandal from. Scandalon. It means to trip over something. To be tripped up by something. They tripped up on Christ. And they did. They stumbled when Jesus came along. And to the Greeks, that is so foolish. A lowly, homeless Jew crucified on a Roman cross. How in the world is that wisdom? You see how that would not appeal to the general thinking of a Greek? How silly. That's foolish. That is so foolish. A Jew being crucified on a Roman cross. Jews died on Roman crosses millions of times. He's just another Jew. What's the big deal? That is so silly. That's the thinking of the Greeks. Generally speaking, when it came to the approach of gospel preaching, Paul presented Jesus Christ and him crucified. That is God's wisdom to save the world. You see how not many Greeks are going to be attracted to that? But as it turns out, many of them did. They did. And these Corinthians are proof of that. And so Paul says, but we preach Christ crucified. Verse 24, but to those who are called. Now he's talking about something else here. Those who are called. How are they called? They're not called by the name of Paul. They're not called by the name of Apollos. They're called by Christ. But to those who are called, and he's saying that would be you Corinthians, both Jews and Greeks, and both Jews and Greeks, as far as the world is concerned, that's one way of putting it. That's the world, both Jews and Greeks. Go back to Romans 1 and verse 16. Paul writes, for I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God to those who believe. To who? The Jew first, and also to the Greek. Who does that leave out? Nobody. That's the world. You see that? To the Jews and the Greeks here. That's the world. to the Greeks, to the Jews and the Greeks. What is he? To those who are called, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God. Well, that's a powerful statement right there by Paul. That Christ is the power of God and the wisdom of God. See what Paul's doing? He's separating the wisdom of men versus the wisdom of God. Just how great is it? Christ is at the core, the center of God's power and his wisdom. Do you see Paul in this telling us about the nature of Jesus Christ? Is Christ a human being? No, he is deity. He is God. He is the power of God and the wisdom of God. He's from God, and he is the Son of God. So he's reaffirming the deity of Christ here when he calls him the power and the wisdom of God. And then he concludes, verse 25, because the foolishness of God. Now, again, he's using that accommodatively. To the Greeks, what they think of as foolishness. The foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men. Again, the weakness of God from a human perspective, human point of view, from the Greek point of view. Who Jesus is, what he did, what happened to him, that's weakness. A Jew crucified on a Roman cross. Weakness. Now, think about the Jews. What if Jesus had come on the scene, riding in on a white horse with a sword in his hand, shield in his left, and saying, I'm here to redeem, to restore, to be a victor over the Romans? How many Jews would have gotten in line? All they would have lined up, right? No. What did he do? He came into the city of Jerusalem riding on a little donkey. And
unmarried virgin.
There you go.
And born.
And like you said in Matthew 20:28, Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many. That is not what the Jews expected. That's right. That's not what a God does. He does not lower himself to that level. But that is what the Greeks would see. That's foolish. That's weak. So Paul kind of wears that or uses that language, the foolishness of God, the weakness of God, as a banner of pride. Call it what you will. So you may think it's foolishness, but it's what saves you. You may think it's weak, but it has the power to redeem. All right? All right, let's look at this next section, verse 26, down to the end of the chapter. Alfred, do you mind reading that for us, please?
It says, for you see your calling, brethren, that not many wise according to the flesh, not many mighty, not many noble are called. But God has chosen the foolish things of the world to put to shame the wise, and God has chosen the weak things of the world to put to shame the things which are mighty. And the base things of the world and things which are despised God has chosen, and the things which are not, to bring to nothing the things that are, that no flesh should glory in his presence, but to him who are in Christ Jesus, who became for us wisdom from God, and righteousness and sanctification and redemption, that, as it is written, he who glories, let him glory in the Lord.
All right, thank you. All right, so we've seen here, he shows the contrast between the gospel is God's saving power. That's what he's shown in what we just looked at, verse 18 through 24, all right? 25. Versus the wisdom of men and the way that they think. Now, what does he do? He kind of adds another argument to the level here in this last part of this chapter. For you see your calling, brethren, And then he kind of ties it back into those rhetorical questions that go back up to verse 20. But he names three classes of people. The first one is who? The wise. The second are the mighty. And the third are the noble. Okay? How many of those groups of people are going to, is the gospel going to appeal to? Not many, right? Not very many. What's he saying about these Corinthians? He says, you see your calling. What is he saying about them? They're not mighty people. They're not noble people. They are not wise people. He's not insulting them. He's just pointing out the fact that the nature of the people that are going to believe is very different from the nature of people of the world that are attracted to and can only see things through human wisdom and things that are mighty or powerful or that have strength. To the Greeks and to the Romans, especially the Romans, a show of weakness was, you didn't do that. You never did show weakness. Romans were very much attracted to that which was powerful, that which was strong, and was going to last. That shows up in their military, it shows up in their architecture. I mean, the ruins of Rome, of ancient Rome, to this day are still impressive. I mean, while many of them, yeah, they're still ruins, there are some of those buildings that have endured for over 2,000 years, and they're still standing, still working, active structures. They admired and appreciated strength. And it was the powerful and the mighty are the ones who rule the world, all right? And the Greeks, certainly that came along for the ride as well in the Roman world. These people, he says, brethren, look at yourself. Who are you? Are you of the wise? Are you of the mighty? Are you of the noble? No, you're probably not. That's not who you are. And that's not what you... He's really, in a way, showing them, giving them a compliment. Reminding them that, look, you see through human wisdom as not an answer to your needs. And you obeyed the gospel. You saw the wisdom of God in sending his son to die out of conquer. You saw the wisdom of that. And you obeyed that. He's trying to pull them back to where they were when they obeyed the gospel to remind them, this is what you became. And so that is really a compliment in verse 26, if you think about it. Those saved, they see the message of the cross as God's power to save. And they see it as the wisdom of God. Now, what was actually the wisdom of God, man, in his thinking, considered to be mere foolishness or even offensive. Okay, so what has he done? Verse 27. Interesting choice of words here. God has chosen the foolish things of the world to put to shame the wise. All right, did you notice how many times he uses that phrase, God has chosen? In the next couple of verses, well, verse 27 and 28. 3 times, right? Just like there's 3 kind of, types of people that are not going to be attracted to the gospel, the wise, the mighty, the noble. What has God chosen? All right? Now, forget Calvinism here, the idea that God has chosen certain ones to be saved and everybody else to be lost. That's not even in Paul's thinking here. God did not choose specific people to be saved. He chose, though, a group of people, how they're going to be saved. And that was, of course, by the gospel. The things, again, which the world considers foolish are the very persons and things which God selected to accomplish his own purpose. What does it mean to put to shame? God has chosen the foolish things of the world to put to shame the wise. And God has chosen the weak things of the world to put to shame the things which are mighty. And the base things of the world and the things which are despised God has chosen, and the things which are not, to bring to nothing the things that are, that no flesh should glory in his presence. All right, to put to shame. The old King James has, is it confound there, Sylvia?
What chapter?
Verse 27.
God has chosen the foolish things of the world to confound the wise.
Confound, okay, or to put shame, to bring to shame. All right, but God has chosen the foolish things. Again, think about how Paul uses the word foolish here. Accommodatively. Foolish according to who? To men, to the world, right? He's chosen the foolish things to bring to shame the wise, that he might shame the wise. God has chosen the weak things of the world. Again, from a worldly point of view, Christ is weak, but to put to shame the things that are mighty. So Paul's using a play on words here. And again, he does it in verse 28. The emphasis here is on God's choice, because God chose the weak and foolish things. They cannot be overthrown by the strong and the wise things of men. God's choice stands firm and will stand in the end. Everything else is going to fall. All right, he talks about the base things of the world. That's in base. When you think of something that's base, what does that mean? Okay, it has the idea of foundationary. But as far as people are concerned, all right, he talked about one class of people in verse 26, the last group. Not many noble are called. All right, who are the noble people? Kings, highborn people, right? Noble people, nobility. Those that are going to rule, those that are in positions of power. That's who he's talking about there. Noble born, all right? You know, only a knight in medieval times could be, had to be a noble birth. He couldn't be a common man. Couldn't be a serf, or he had to come from somebody who had land and position and power and all that. There was nobility, and then you have your common people, all right? That's what he's talking about, the base things, the common things, the things that are not of noble birth. That, again, stands in contrast to those that are noble. Okay, but the things that are despised, of this world, or that God says, or Paul says are the despised things, this world has rejected, all right? Now, how did the Jews and how did apparently the Greeks view Jesus' death on the cross? Yeah,
And the cross was a shameful way to
yeah, it was shameful. There was shame attached to the cross, absolutely. In Hebrews chapter 12, the writer of Hebrews talked about that. When Jesus was on the cross, he despised the shame of the cross. He looked down upon the shame of the cross. He recognized it as a shameful way to die, but he didn't think anything of it. He went through that willingly. Man, it's already 10:15.
Sean, it just makes me think of how simple they think it. Surely this guy that just died on that cross, if I just believe in him, I can be completely absolved
Yeah.
sorry, but just taking away all my sins.
Right.
I just can't believe that. And it brought me to think about Naaman. When Naaman
Yeah.
was told to go dip.
Such a simple thing.
He's like, no, I want somebody.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Same principle. Same way of thinking. All right. Y'all can come in, and we gotta stop here. I wish we had another hour. This is such good. Love this stuff. It's such good. All right, let's continue to read through this chapter and into chapter 2, because Paul's argument continues into chapter 2, and where it focuses really upon the source of God's wisdom, or the gospel.